So Visions 2 is finally here and it needs to be broken down. So here's the breakdown for every single episode of Season 2. Let's get straight into it. We begin with the first episode titled Sith by Studio guiri, perhaps the most conceptually complex of all the episodes. The first episode represents the Force through the use of art, and this is especially the case for Lola, the main character whose use of the Force is represented by the art around her. We see Lola sleeping through a nightmare, and if you notice in the background, we can see these stripes of black shooting out around her, symbolizing her struggle with the dark side and likely created while she was having the nightmare. We see Lola having a drink, which is probably this universe's equivalent of coffee, and she then tries to use the Force to control these liquid bubbles. But instead of staying as these colorful orbs, they quickly turn black, again reflecting her inner turmoil. Lola expresses her confusion over why this is happening, which sets the tone for the entire episode, which is all about the acceptance of the light and darkness within her. She walks through an indoor forest of some sort, and we get a brief glimpse at the Dark Lord watching her. The artwork in these scenes are simplistic but intricate at the same time. We see droid hands reaching out from the ground, and Lola walks into a dark corridor, and judging by her expression, there is clear discomfort. And this really reminded me of the darkside cave that Luke went through during The Empire Strikes Back, and like the other parts of Lola's home, it is as much a reflection of her as any part of the building. We also get to see the distinct eyes of the Sith Master both inside the tunnel and on the mural Lola is creating. And in the sketched out but unpainted section, we can even see her lightsaber hilt. Lola tries to paint her artwork, but as she does so, her paint progressively gets darker and darker, from a brownish color all the way to black despite the use of the same rock. Lola reflects that the darkness within her wants to be part of the painting despite her intent, and this is perhaps a reflection of how persistent the dark side can be. On the other hand, as these paintings are a reflection of Lola, the encroaching darkness on her paintings is illustrative that it is indeed part of her, and her refusal to accept that part of her is creating that turmoil within her. Lola decides to check out a faulty sensor, and she hops on a wheel bike, which is a more colorful version of Grievous's wheel bike from Utapau. Lola fixes a loose repulsorlift, and repulsorlifts are essentially what makes a certain vehicle in Star Wars float, a sort of anti-gravity device, although not sure what its purpose is here given that Lola is using a wheel bike. Lola is confronted by the Sith Master and his goons, and the Dark Lord really reminded me of Darth Malgus, a Sith Lord from the Old Republic. Lola tries to escape, and notice how as the lasers make contact they look like splashes of paint. Just another cool little detail. The goons chase after her using jetpacks, which really reminded me of this scene.
Oh, they fly now! They fly now? They fly now!
Lola confronts her former master in the darkside corridor, which is reminiscent of Luke's duel with Vader in the cave. Also, it's also worth mentioning that in this universe, lightsaber colors range from red to yellow, with red being the dark side and yellow representing the light. And as the duel progresses, we see the surroundings morph a few times, letting us know that what we initially perceived as physical constructs within the fortress are actually metaphysical realities, basically compartments of Lola's personality representing her character within. Lola ignites the other half of her lightsaber, accepting that the darkness within her is part of her and kills her former master, and the episode ends with her acceptance and development of her inner self. We then move on to episode 2, Screecher's Reach. We begin the episode with a 2D perspective, and we see workers waking up and attending to their daily chores in this factory. We hear the sound of a probe droid, the very same one that the Imperial probe droids make. And the mundaneness of this situation is reflected in this 2D perspective, and it's not until the main character doll walks out that the camera angle breaks free from this suffocative experience, reflecting what doll feels inside as well. And notice how as doll gets fed up, we see her pressure valve break, with flashes of red light, which reflect how sick she is with her current life and potentially how the Sith we see at the end of the episode might be manipulating her. Doll and her friends begin their journey, and it's worth noting that this episode has a lot of heavy Irish influences. We see some beautiful scenery artwork in the background, the group make camp, and we learn that Doll wants more from her life. Much like Luke, she has a desire to break free from her current state, giving us the impetus behind her character. The group arrives in front of the cave, which is reminiscent of a darkside cave, and we see Doll whisper a short prayer to a pendant she is wearing. The group encounters the ghosts and her screeches are bone-chilling. Doll splits with the rest of the group to confront the ghost by herself, which as we learn later was part of the trial. The ghost turns out to be a former Sith, likely so far corrupted that it has become a monster, which really reminded me of Abeloth, who in Legends was a celestial, the same kind as the father, son, and daughter, and at times was depicted as a force-devouring monster. As Doll struggles against the monster, it's interesting that as she prays to the pendant, nothing happens. Instead, when she instinctively reaches for the light, only then does she find her strength, letting us know that it is the light that gives her her strength and not the pendant or the Sith behind it. As the light shines, we see how pathetic the monster is. Doll strikes down the ghost and meets up with her friends and proceeds to talk to the pendant, which finally talks back. And it's interesting to note that when Doll truly needed help, the Sith was never there to offer guidance, only choosing to speak once it was all over, hinting that the Sith is only self-interested. We see a ship land which then reveals the Sith called the Sith Mother. Doll is forced to choose between a bigger life and her friends, and she opts to leave. Also, notice that the Sith Mother's eyes changes in color from gray to yellow when Doll suggests that her friends could come with her, again revealing the true purpose of the Sith Mother and her interest in Doll. And the entire episode is heavy with Irish influences, including the names of the characters. Doll's name in particular in Irish means a blind person, referring to her inability to see clearly for what the Sith Mother is. And thus the entire episode is essentially a call to adventure that is flipped on its head. Where Luke's call to adventure was facilitated by someone good like Obi-Wan, Doll is exploited by the Sith Mother who uses Doll's desires. And you can't help but wonder what if, like Doll, a Sith had found Luke instead. The next episode, titled The Stars by Darth Stadio, takes a massive step in a different direction when it comes to animation. We begin the episode with Tichina observing the nature around her as it wilts and dies. The episode immediately establishes that the world and its peoples react to the stars. Tichina tries to use the Force to stop a TIE fighter but is saved by her sister. We are given the backstory to this world and the girls, and the episode is very much inspired by the colonization of Patagonia, which are parts of South America. And the episode very much reflects this, with the Empire acting as the colonizers, stripping the world of its natural resources and committing genocide. We soon learn that Tichina is a dreamer, while her older sister Kotin is a realist, and the name Tichina certainly reflects this, which is a Guyana name for valiant defender. I wasn't able to find conclusive information on what Kotin means, but the closest I could find had the name Kotin associated with English roots, meaning at the cottages. But if you know what it means, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. Kotin sneaks into an Imperial factory where we get to see a mouse droid and snowtroopers. Tichina ends up getting captured, and the people holding her captive are dressed as Imperial workers, the same outfit which we saw in Rebels in the TIE Defender factory on Lothal. The Imperials try to shut down the exit to prevent them from escaping, and the character here is named as Officer, although I felt that the way she was dressed, the character would have been more appropriately titled as the Governor. Tichina refuses to leave, preferring to fight the Imperials, which puts her in trouble, forcing her sister to use the Force to save her. The two of them are confronted by an AT-ST, the same one that killed their mother, and they both reach out with the Force, but not at the walker but the water tank behind it, which was a great bit of subversion. The factory is destroyed and the stars are back, and I have to say that out of all the episodes, this one perhaps had the most distinctive and memorable soundtrack, for me at least. The next episode, I Am Your Mother by Artman Studios, and it's really an episode of Easter eggs galore. The title is of course a play on the I Am Your Father quote, and we begin the episode with an announcement from Wedge Antilles, who is voiced by none other than Dennis Lawson himself. Wedge was of course an OG member of the original trilogy, so it's nice to see him be part of Star Wars outside the films. We soon learn that the upcoming race is taking part in Hana City, which is the capital of the planet Chandrilla, Mon Mothma's home world, and at this point in time it's probably the capital of the New Republic. We see some Arbesh, which is translated to Hana City Flight School. The transmission is interrupted by a Jawa stealing a power cell, and the Jawa even says the iconic line. We meet the main character Annie, who has an X-Wing and a T-16 Skyhopper, the same model that Luke was playing with in A New Hope. And the name Annie is of course a play on Anakin's nickname, which was Annie as well.
Annie? My goodness, you've grown.
Annie's full name is actually Annie Sukaline Kalfas, which is far too much for most people, which is where the Annie nickname comes in. It's also worth noting that Annie is wearing a Rebel pilot outfit, which makes sense as she is enrolled in the New Republic Starfighter Academy. We soon learn that Annie is embarrassed by how her mother behaves, preferring not to take part in the race because of it, setting up the central moral lesson of this episode. We also see her mother work on a droid, and she even uses a Mandalorian face shield when working, perhaps paying homage to the armor and the Mandalorian show. We also meet Z1, who is an astromech dog, and after falling down, it plays a holo recording of the two of them flying in the past, and the scene is very much reminiscent of Leia's message to Obi-Wan. The holo recording also shows Annie's mother teaching her the Ryloth role, and Ryloth refers to the planet that the Twi'leks were originally from, which Annie and her mother are. In the background, we can even see a Harrison Dula poster, who is also a fellow Twi'lek, a Wedge Antilles poster but with him in blue, and a poster featuring the band Star Waver from the episode Tatooine Rhapsody from the last season of Visions, which is really cool and does give us some connective tissue between the two seasons. We also see a Max Rebo plush toy sitting on the bed as well. Annie's mom shows her the lunch she made and she adds water to it, which causes the bread to rise, reminiscent of how Rey ate back in The Force Awakens. Annie leaves and her mother realizes that she forgot to take her lunch. We then see the starting line of the race and we see an S-161 Stinger, the same model as the Mantis which Cal Kestis uses. Next to it, we see a red and black ship which really reminded me of the Naboo Royal Starship. We get a brief look at a porg which was introduced back in The Last Jedi. Annie walks by a marketplace and there is so much to unpack here. First, we see Slave Leia's outfit, Luke's chopped off hand, which in canon was actually recovered and used by Palpatine as part of his cloning experiments. We also see Maelurans, the iconic Star Wars fruit, a Camtono, which was really an ice cream maker first introduced in The Empire Strikes Back randomly and featured in the season 1 of The Mandalorian. We see a Tusken Raider's rifle, another T-16 Skyhopper, Luke's shielded helmet, the one that he used in A New Hope, a combat remote droid, also the one used by Luke in that same scene, and Luke/Anakin's lightsaber, which was about to get stolen by a Jawa, but the Jawa was beaten to the punch. We also see a Stormtrooper's helmet. Annie and her friends encounter Julian Van Riepel, the antagonist of this episode, and she and her mother really reminded me of Arhinda Price from the Rebels show, especially with the haircut and all. And in the background, we can see wooden carvings of blurgs, banthas, and porgs, and if you look even further into the background, we can see toilets for Jawas, humans, and Wookiees, so very inclusive indeed. She calls Annie's ship a porta-potty, but Annie corrects her that it's actually a space tug, and space tugs in Star Wars are a spacecraft designed to assist larger vessels and cargo, attaching themselves using clamps or tractor beams to guide ships. We see a Wookiee baby rip the arms off his toy, which is supposed to be something Wookiees do to their enemies. We can also see Chopper in the background as well as a Gamorrean guard and its kid. Annie's mom decides to join the race after some insults were thrown at them by the Van Riepel family. Annie and her mother have a heart-to-heart moment, and Annie learns to be proud of who she is and where she comes from. The Van Riepel use a Death Star to shoot lasers, and Annie pulls out the Ryloth roll, which helps them win the race. And overall, this was a very sweet episode with quality storytelling. Definitely one of my favorites from the season. Oh, and if you stick around to watch the credits, you can even hear Wedge plug his merch at the end.
Keep an eye out for Wedge-themed products at my merchandise stall.
Next, on to episode 5, Journey to the Dark Head by Studio Mir. A really action-packed episode. We begin the episode with Ara as a girl reading about the future. We learn that she is reading a prophecy but has no idea what it really means. We also then learn that there is a galactic-wide war between the Sith and the Jedi going on. And we learn about Ara's brash character and impatience to do what she believes is right. We skip forward to an older Ara who is appealing to the Jedi Council for her mission, believing that cutting off the Dark Head will end the conflict with the Sith. A council member by the name of Master Duta interprets her request as,
"Then what you're saying is that by breaking the mirror, we may stand a chance to alter what the mirror reflects."
and approves the mission. But when you think about what she said, breaking a mirror doesn't change an appearance, only what one sees. And this really only makes sense by the end of the episode, with Ada recognizing that destroying the dark head wouldn't change anything. Hence, Master Duta's words are really words of wisdom that Aura has yet to recognize by this point. And Master Duta here is a Talothian, the same species as Jedi Master Adigalia. Jedi Master Duta approves of the mission, which Jedi Master Lesa Gum was surprised by, and she decides to send Jedi Tool to accompany Ada on this mission. Tool himself, now a Jedi Knight, is hunted by his past memories as a Padawan, especially the death of his master, Master Moru, at the hands of the Sith Lord Bichan. Bichan spares Tool, but not before offering him a choice and leaving him with a scar. Tool and Ada begin their journey, and their relationship is off to a rocky start. The two of them stop by a shop to pick up supplies, and Tool watches a cult procession which triggers his PTSD, which in turn alerts the Sith Lord to his presence. Bichan shoots them down, and we see some Arbesh, which translates to warning, crash imminent. They crash in the temple, but the chase continues and Tool confronts Bichan. The two manage to get to the statue, and as Tool and Bichan duel, Ada plants the bombs, but she soon realizes that all is not what it seems. She soon learns that the light and dark are not fixed, there is no one without the other, which is where she realizes that the prophecy she read all those years had been about her and Tool. And I actually forgot all about the prophecy, so when this happened, it was quite a twist for me. Tool manages to overcome his fear and kills Bichan, which really reminded me of the way Obi-Wan defeated Maul the first time, and I have to say that the combat artwork in this episode is fantastic. The way they depicted the action sequences has such clarity and dynamic, it's really top notch. And what I like about this episode is that unlike the rest, it's not afraid to scale up. Whereas other episodes are focused on smaller stories within the Star Wars universe, Journey to the Dark Head is willing to make a statement within the Star Wars universe even though it is not canon. And the wide moral lesson delivered here is fantastic as well, with Tal saying,
as much hope as it does despair.
And this poignant moment is a very good way of reiterating a long-standing theme of Star Wars, that being hope. Episode 6, The Spy Dancer by Studio La Cachette, was very much a surprising one. I wasn't sure what to expect, but boy was it good. We begin the episode with two stormtroopers checking for IDs and scan docs, and if you look at the water reflection, you can actually see a Star Destroyer overhead. We soon learn that there is a big performance that is about to happen, and all these stormtroopers are pretty hyped to see it. We are then introduced to Hestus, an assistant, and Louis, the star performer. We soon learn that the performance is all a facade for rebel spies to gather information, and this is very much based on real-life figures like Mata Hari, who supposedly used her craft as a dancer to spy on the French and Germans in World War I. Loie receives a communication from a comm device hidden in a C-3PO-looking bust. The comm device itself is actually the same model used by Qui-Gon in The Phantom Menace. Loie talks to John, a rebel, and we see that the rebels are building a ship using parts of TIE fighters. Loie is assigned to place these trackers on the stormtroopers, and we learn that she is someone who is tired of fighting. Years spent in this rebellion has led her to be wary of this conflict. Just then, a special guest arrives and the performance begins. And much of this performance reminded me of the performance on Coruscant, where we hear Palpatine tell Anakin about the story of Darth Plagueis. All goes well until Loie sees the special guest, which triggers flashbacks to when the Empire first arrived, with her child being taken from her. Next to the special guest is a K2 unit, the same model as K2SO from Rogue One. Loie sends everyone away and prepares to assassinate these special guests, but before she can do so, she realizes that it's not the man that she was looking for. Taking a closer look at the man, we can deduce that from his white uniform and black hat that he is likely a member of the ISB. The whole thing goes wrong and a battle ensues. Loie ends up saving the ISB officer from Hestus' shot, which was quite a surprising twist. A decision, as we later learned, was made out of her suspicion that he was her long-lost son. AT-AT walkers arrive and level the whole place, but not before Loie and the rest make their escape. And even though they were forced to flee, Loie does leave with a new sense of hope and purpose, now knowing that her son is alive. And as we later see, he was indeed her son. But whether he intentionally chose to hide his identity or not is a question that remains to be answered. with his horns shaved and an eye patch to cover one eye. And this is perhaps a reflection of the deeply racist and xenophobic culture within the Empire, which prioritized humans over others. And so it was quite a nice touch that the episode was able to hint at it in the closing moments. Overall, I was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed this episode. There was a lot of heart behind it, and the story of a mother reuniting with her son was quite a fresh take on a Star Wars story. Next up is the Bandits of Golak by 88 Pictures, and this episode had a lot of Indian influences from the setting all the way to the characters. We begin on a train which is as Indian as it gets, and we can see several different species of aliens. But the most interesting one has to be the Cassian, which happens to be the same species as Jedi Master Terra Sinube. We are introduced to Rani and Charuk, and we learn that they are running from their village after it was attacked. The train conductor decides to speed up as they're crossing into insurgent territory, and Rani wants to play the flute but Charuk doesn't allow her. He decides to get her some sweets, and just as he leaves, she uses the force to grab the flute. And this gets spotted by some scavengers and reported to a stormtrooper. Charuk manages to distract the trooper by stealing some sweets, and an entire chase sequence ensues. After an awesome chase sequence, the two of them manage to end up at their destination. We see some Arbesh that translates to Golak Mahal and Hookah. Mahal is an Indian word for mansion or palace, and hookah, although spelled differently, likely refers to the activity of smoking tobacco using water vapor. And from the onset, the place looks like an Indian temple in real life, which is quite a tongue-in-cheek moment as there is a Jedi running it behind the scenes, so in a way it is a Jedi temple. The Jedi's name is Rugal, and the old lady welcomes them and notices that Rani has the Force. However, it's all interrupted by the arrival of an Inquisitor and two Purge troopers, and the characterization of the Inquisitor is based on an Indian Jinn, which as I understand it are demons of sorts. And the characterization and portrayal of the Inquisitor is fantastic. You can immediately feel his presence and threat behind his words. We also learned that the Inquisitor visited several villages in search of Rani and decided to burn them all, leaving no survivors, which probably also included their home village, which they had to run from as well. The sandstorm arrives and chaos ensues. There are some gorgeous slow-mo shots before the Jedi reveals herself, and the action sequence is pretty impressive, especially for how it manages to feel so weighted despite being animated. More often than not, lightsaber animation sequences can often feel weightless, but this one manages to get it just right. The Jedi defeats the Inquisitors and she reveals the Jedi symbol at the bottom of a pool. We soon learn that Charuk must part ways with Rani as she must now walk her own path, and it's a bittersweet moment. The episode does so well in building their relationship and endearing us to them that once this moment occurs, it's actually quite sad. Rani leaves Charuk with her flute and the episode ends there. We then move on to the 8th episode, titled The Pit by Lucasfilm and Dart Stadio. We see a group of prisoners being led by stormtroopers and they are then forced to dig. We soon learn that they are after kyber crystals, which the Empire was known to be very greedy for, in part due to the Death Star project and in this case, for the construction of a nearby city. An Imperial probe droid delivers a sample to the stormtrooper and time goes by until they hit rock bottom. With that, the prisoners are freed but left to die at the bottom of the pit. What happens next is essentially a message of hope. While others have given up trying to get out, Crux hasn't given up hope. He tells a young girl by the name of Levy to follow the light, basically telling her not to give up hope, and hands her a kyber crystal. As he climbs out of the pit, I get a lot of Batman vibes from it, especially the scene where Batman climbs out of the prison pit. Crux is helped by these moles, perhaps by way of the Force. Crux tries to get help, but he ends up being stunned by stormtroopers. Crux gets brutally murdered, but has done enough to attract the attention of the city people. There is a powerful moment of the people rising up against the Empire, and they manage to pull everyone out. The episode ends with Levy and her mother aboard a ship, and Levy ends up connecting with the kyber crystal through the Force, turning it blue, letting us know that she will likely end up being a Jedi. The episode has a mid-credits scene where we see the completed artwork of one of the prisoners. The Arbesh in the artwork reads "The Pit," the title of the episode. I have to say that there wasn't much in terms of breakdown, and I will be honest to say that this wasn't my favorite episode. I didn't really feel connected to it, and at times it felt more like a general dystopian sci-fi story with some Star Wars elements sprinkled in, but that's just how I feel about it. On to episode 9, titled Ao's Story by Triggerfish. We start off the episode with a prologue which no other episode has done before, and we learn that the world Korba is rich with kyber crystals but was corrupted by the Sith. Since then, the Jedi have come to purify what they can, and this refers to the process of the Sith bleeding a kyber crystal, which essentially means they pour all their rage and hatred into it to turn it red. And the process of purifying it essentially turns the kyber white, which is also where Ahsoka got her lightsabers from. We are introduced to Ao, who has this unique gift of connecting with the Force through her voice, and this really reminded me of the High Republic character Avar Kriss, who viewed the Force as music. We meet Ao's father, and he tells her to keep her distance from Kratu, the visiting Jedi. And this word of caution stems from the fact that her father doesn't know what to make of the Force, and it is his limited understanding and awareness of his daughter's abilities that leads him to be somewhat overprotective. Ao's curiosity ends up attracting the Jedi's attention, and Kratu realizes that she is Force sensitive. Ao's father takes her into the market while she heads off into work, and at the marketplace we can see a Mandalorian and a repair droid in the background, the same type used by Pelimato. As Ao does her work, she comes across a stone rat attached to the side of a beast. The rat runs into a hole, which then inspires her to go visit a kyber cave. She grabs a miner's helmet, and this display of all the helmets reminded me of that scene in Andor where we can see the workers pick up or put aside their gear. Ao finds her father entering the cave as well, and she manages to find a different way in. She finds a ton of kyber crystals, and her connection to it starts to cause a cave-in. The two of them manage to find their way out but aren't able to make it past the bridge. But luckily enough, Kratu manages to save them. She uses a force shield to block the falling rocks, and Ao uses her voice to stop the seismic reactions, and in the process purifying all the kyber on the planet. And the use of color here is incredibly gorgeous. The balance of blue, red, and white in between gives off this ethereal feel to the entire episode. Kratu offers to teach Ao how to use the Force, and her father finds it within himself to let her go. Overall, it's a very sweet episode, and the depiction of how Ao connects with the Force is simple enough but also wholly unique. So that's it for the breakdown of Season 2 of Visions. I have to say I thoroughly enjoyed it, and despite its departure from anime, it still holds up. The varied art styles and cultural backgrounds of each story really shine through, and without the burden of it being canon, there is a lot of room for creativity. Anyways, that's all for this video. Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments down below, be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I'm the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.